Well, thank you very much. My presentation is going to be a little bit different than Ricardo's in that Ricardo's is really comprehensive, and it gave a lot more sort of things that we all should be concerned about, but mine more has mostly more of an engineering focus. I do want to reiterate that times are changing a little bit with the regional registries. They've been the same for 15 years, but there's going to be a wide-scale change that's going to occur the next couple of years. And this goes from governance and the sort of challenges it has, whether or not the IT should be involved, or what happens to ICANN, where does IANA go, and so forth, so on and so forth. But what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about ARIN, and most of y'all are in ARIN's region. ARIN's region, by the way, we're actually in LACNIC region right now. ARIN's region is North America, basically United States and Canada, and the English-speaking Caribbean islands. So I'll go ahead and get started at this point. What I'd like to talk about is give you some really sort of cool graphs. It's the kind of things I kind of like to show. Are sort of very immediate focus, what we're planning on working on, and some of the challenges. And one of the things I like to do when we get into the challenges is if you sleep through the rest of it, I'd like you to wake up for the challenges, because there are some issues that really will, that your voice will be really important to hear as we go forward, because ARIN is going to be changing. And we'd like to get your input on the way it should go forward. So here you see our whois query load. And it's kind of like up to the right. It's that really kind of cool graph that as the internet grows, you see a lot more traffic. And we're seeing just incredible amounts of traffic that's hitting our whois servers now. And we're actually expanding our footprint to various locations. We have a West Coast facility now, and we've redone our East Coast facility to actually handle the load. We're over 100 queries per second on whois, and as a person who came from VeriSign, we're not at those numbers yet in terms of what they saw on their whois servers, but we're really approaching the sort of numbers that VeriSign sees on the COM whois server. The routing registry query load. This is kind of interesting. So whereas the whois for IP addresses is in the hundreds of queries per second, this thing is like chirping in the woods. The routing registry sees queries in the minute time range. And the spikes that you saw in the beginning was a researcher who kind of went a little bit crazy. And after we finally figured out who that person was, we kind of showed him, okay, here's how you do it, and actually everything kind of settled down at that point. So these spikes, they're very small compared to what whois sees regularly. Here's another thing I like to show, and that is about 2 years ago, there was a policy that was actually put forward that said, hey, as part of the template, we also like to see the origin AS actually included. And so we've been doing this a couple times a year where we'll go ahead and look to see whether or not if that origin AS is actually indeed correct within route views. And we're finding out that this is very true for whois, that it is actually very valid. It has pretty good correct answers. It has a lot more, which is somewhat misleading because there could be just one route announcement, but hundreds of these whois entries in it. So that are covered by that one route announcement, but it is indeed correct because the origin is the origin for that particular network. And as you can see, that the IRR is not too valid. So the information on it is you basically have a 50-50% chance of getting the right information out of the IRR. As we start going forward, and everyone's talking about the depletion of V4 and the idea of V6 coming forward, or maybe not coming forward, what's actually happening? Is there going to be a land rush on V4 space? And our graphs show that this is not true, that we're actually flatlining right now. So people aren't really making this land rush yet. And maybe that will be coming, but not yet. Go ahead, Dave.
I'm just wondering if you look at the, the curve of the sort of the growth of the routing table over the last 10 or whatever years, the Jeff Houston graph, you notice that it flattens out around the time of the implosion of the tech industry, 2000 or whatever. Do you think there's any such effect going on here now due to the downturn?
I don't know if we've seen that yet. Leslie, have you haven't noticed anything, have you? No. So we're seeing about the same sort of numbers that we've seen before. Maybe it's kind of like a cable industry where there's a little bit of a runway yet, and we're still working off of that runway. And when the runway ends, then maybe we'll see the implosion at that point. But not yet. We're not seeing it. But what's interesting to me is we're kind of as a society, we're kind of a society of hoarders. And I'm kind of surprised given that, hey, we're going to be running out of these V4 space. That people, I'm kind of surprised we're not starting to see the whole idea of people saying, hey, I'm going to try to get as much as I can now.
Don't you think that might be dampened by the needs-based policies, though?
That's certainly true, but people can certainly try to lie. And they do lie.
What?
What? Yeah. But we're not seeing too many liars yet. And you can also see basically on /24 is actually allocated, that's also flatlined. Now I'm going to go on to V6. V6 request, it is increasing by some. It is a fairly small number still, but there is going to be a larger interest in it. And the same thing with V4 allocations is that it's growing as well with the number of requests. Makes sense. So now I'm going to move on to one of the topics which is a little bit controversial. As you all know, ARIN was actually brought together about 10 years ago, but a lot of the addresses that was actually allocated within ARIN's region were done previously, and those are defined as legacy addresses. And those addresses are really under no sort of contract. All y'all who've received addresses from ARIN from that point after that ARIN was incorporated actually had to sign a registration services agreement. And there's this push underway to actually do a similar sort of agreement for the legacy space holder. And as you can see, that legacy space holders are fairly, in this particular slide, are fairly consistent on not really changing their organizational information too much. They're pretty stable. Most 75% are new orgs and modifications to those orgs. People have a little bit of thrash when they first come into the system. But those who have been around for a while, especially the legacy addresses, which are over 10 years old by definition, there's been just very little change. But you can see that on the network modification request, that's not true. And this is basically all those changes made to your reverse name servers and sort of more maybe changing the origin AS and that sort of thing. And that is fairly close to the sort of breakout between legacy addresses that ARIN manages and the non-legacy addresses that ARIN manages. So, and one of the things that we're trying to do, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, is we're trying to help those those who do not have any sort of agreement with ARIN come into the fold with this legacy registration services agreement. And so far we've had 456 signed agreements actually come in. And what's interesting about this is that you see these peaks, like in April, there's 90, and 71 in October. And those actually correspond to ARIN's meetings. And so there seems to be sort of this oh yeah, I need to really think about this when the meetings come forward. And they go ahead and sign these things and go on. You can see on this graph that these agreements are a little bit complicated because usually these things are just kind of signed off and you're done with it. But a lot of organizations require some sort of legal review before going forward. And a lot of these are ARIN's lawyer and the legacy addresses lawyers representatives actually getting together and saying, okay, what does this really mean? And one of the things that's happened out of that's helped us sort of refactor the legacy RSA agreement. And there's going to be a new version coming out here very shortly, if it hasn't already. That's going to be addressing some of these changes that we've received as we've learned from going through this process. But the big take home on this slide is you can see that this thing is kind of complicated. This isn't just a simple thing to do. I wish it was simple. So what are we currently focusing on? Well, I've been at ARIN for about a year now, and when I came to ARIN, almost everything was based off of templates. Mail in your template to ARIN. And a lot of the other registries have gone well beyond that, and we're trying to basically join the throw and actually do things on via the web. And so we're upgrading our services, and as you will, we've put on secure login. And if you go to ARIN's website, you'll see it on the upper left-hand side, secure login. You can go ahead and start associating some of the resources that you have with login ID over the web. And we plan on adding more and more to this so that you can actually manage this stuff over the web instead of doing this over templates. I think that'd be a great thing. The second thing is that we plan on fixing the existing IRR system. It's frankly really old. It's really dusty. It sits and it doesn't get a lot of traffic, so we don't pay a lot of attention to it. But we plan on doing that this year, and we plan on doing some V6 enhancements as well as some stronger incorporation with our current database. We plan on looking at the directory services problem, and I have here who is and our who is. And for you who are like golden oldies, I was one of the guys who helped create our who is, and I'm really sorry that you're dealing with really old code. We're planning on looking at new ways of doing directory services and making something a little bit more lightweight than what's currently available today. One may be, and I'll foreshadow this a bit, might be using IRIS, which is IETF standard, which is a way that many of the forward registries, ComNet, and other systems are looking to use as a way of replacing WHOIS. The last thing is that we're looking, and Ricardo kind of alluded to this in his presentation as well, is we're looking for a way of actually helping secure the routing infrastructure. This means that we're not forcing crypto on your particular routers, but we are actually underway putting a project together, having code in-house that's kind of working but not ready for even pilot time yet, for you guys to start looking at this. I'm going to be talking about this next. And this is where I really like you guys to wake up. And this is because you guys really have an impact on what ARIN's future is going to be. And I'm going to start out at the top in terms of what should we be doing with V4 runout? Should ARIN be allowing liberalized transfers? Should we allow the idea of a market-based economy to exist in V4 land? And if we do, what is ARIN's role? Should ARIN just say, okay, there's some sort of need here and that's cool and you exchange money, I'll go ahead and make those changes. Should there be an increased need or increased role? Should there be ARIN's role be also the listing agency? Okay, we have these guys that have been vetted and have a true need, and here are the guys that are willing to actually willing to part with their hoard of IP addresses that they received like 20 years ago. Or should ARIN just kind of ignore all this? And this is sort of a raging debate. This is something that's not so clear. And we really like to hear from you in terms of how to go forward. I have my own personal fears that if ARIN decides to ignore this, that someone else, it may not be authoritative anymore in terms of who holds that particular set of IP addresses, because there's been all these redirects going forward from the legitimate holder, and there was some sort of black market activity occurred, and so it becomes less authoritative in terms of who really has that space. Second of all, what is ARIN's role in providing a basis for a secure routing infrastructure? Right now, if ARIN goes poof, DNS will be affected after a little bit, but frankly, it doesn't affect your routing decisions. And the only time that it really affects your routing decisions is whether or not you want to incorporate this route from someone else. You want to make sure it's validated in some fashion. There could be the possibility that this will tie you a little bit more closely to ARIN in terms of following the validation tree, that ARIN has in some people's view, a more important role. And whether or not you want to be a part of that role or not is, again, something that should be, that's been debated.
When do you want to take questions on this? Because you're covering a ton of stuff. I'd like
I
to
know,
ask you about.
and I'm trying to go fast because I only got half an hour.
Okay.
But go ahead, Dave.
Okay, on the first one about, basically transfer policy, I think it'd be a mistake for ARIN to back out of the consensus-based governance role that they have now, because that's been a powerful thing for the internet and the way it's grown and all of this kind of stuff. And I don't know that you'll be able to control the market in any way, but you can, maybe become a, title agent or something like that. You have to think about that a little bit. But at the meta level, I think it'd be a very big mistake for the registries just to back out and say, it's market world, number one. So I think ARIN should really be thinking about consensus-based roles it could play in different kinds of allocation schemes, market being one of them.
Absolutely, I agree.
That's the first one. Second one on the role, the security thing, right?
Yeah.
And I've talked to you about this in a different context, and I've talked to George and Jeff on the AP Next side and some people at Wright. The question sort of could be asked in a different way, and I don't know, I think this is what you meant. How big of an operational role should the RIRs have?
That's correct.
And that's a pretty hard question to answer, because, to be blunt, as far as I can tell, and I think this is what you said, the RIRs really do not have an operational role in the internet today in any serious way. Do you agree with that?
That's, aside from DNS reverse, if we break DNS, all of a sudden people's mail servers start going berserk. But aside from that, that's kind of our biggest role that we play on the day-to-day operations. Okay,
let's narrow it down then. You don't have the RIRs do not have an operational role in the routing system right now.
That's correct.
And with technologies like CIDR, in theory, they might. Right? So,
exactly.
So the question I think that we ought to be asking you is, if that's true, and if CIDR or these other technologies that put the RIRs in this operational role, where is that expertise going to come from? From where to inside the RIRs is that expertise and infrastructure really going to come from, such that everybody in this room says, okay, that's cool, that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. And have you guys thought about that? There's the meta question of whether, but there's also the question of how.
Absolutely, absolutely. In some sense, we're kind of the doers with CIDR, in that the ITF is the big thinkers like Jeff Houston and Steve Kent and all these guys are putting together crypto in terms of making all this stuff happen. And there's a lot of work that has to be done, frankly, after we're done on y'all's side to make sure that you can actually do these validations. And whether it be in-line, out-of-line, those things have not been decided yet. But these are, it's a very good set of questions, and that's why I'm making the call right now, is that, hey, this is something that ARIN is struggling with and needs to have more community-based input in going forward. Because frankly, it's been something that's been debated, but it really needs to have a larger debate. And it needs to have more people who are affected by ARIN actually included in that debate, aside from those who go to the ARIN meetings. So, Suzanne?
Yeah, I'm going to help Mark out a little bit here. I hope I'm not getting ahead of you. But as far as the discussion about policy issues, let's be very clear on who's ARIN. The policy process is about everybody who shows up and makes a contribution on the mailing lists and in the meetings. It's not just ARIN members. ARIN staff don't participate in the policy discussions.
That's correct.
And I can assure everybody in the room, as a former member of the advisory council, that the input to the policy process is everybody. You don't look at what organization people are with or whether they're members. So a lot of folks in the room, your companies are members, you've gone to policy meetings, you've been on the mailing lists. So ARIN is not them, it's us.
Hi, Mark. Run out is run out. It's going to continue to happen. ARIN liberalizing transfers, in my opinion, is kind of nice, kind of doesn't really matter. Right now, we still can't really track who owns what and where it's going to be originated. IRR data is still entirely broken. Even this room, operators are failing at it now, so I'm not sure how we expect another organization is going to get out a giant paddle and beat us on the ass and say, you know, update your IR filters, and here's how you can securely do it. It's really hard to undo where we are to come back to figure out, you know, normalize all the data, figure out what's actually where, and backpedaling to start over is going to be extremely difficult no matter what we do. I'd really like to see something that is accurate and authoritative, and I don't care what organization is involved, and if we do it by consensus or if we do it by, you know, some for-profit business with some model and some tool that works. If there's something that works, I'm all for it. I don't care where the money comes from. Love to see it happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Aaron. Go ahead, Sandy.
Sandy Murphy, Sparta. Speaking as CIDR Working Group co-chair, I would very much encourage all the operators in the room to at least take a glance at the issues that are being discussed in the CIDR Working Group. We've gotten to the point that the certificate system is relatively mature, but we're having a lot of discussion about how the secure information would actually get employed in making routing decisions. This doesn't mean that certificate work would be being done on the router, but some representation of the secure information has to make an impact on the routing decisions you're making, or there's no point to anything. But we're making the discussion about how the information is employed in routing decisions without a whole lot of information from operators themselves. It would be wonderful to have some input from this community into that discussion.
Okay, great.
Oh, and I noticed on the page when you had a URL pointed to, you pointed to APNIC's wiki for their project. The CIDR Working Group, of course, has a webpage at www.ietf.org. So,
Yep,
okay.
yep. Okay, great, thank you. So, getting back to this, yes.
Just one more. I mean, it does seem like a well-crafted, well-thought-out policy could actually play a significant role in slowing down disaggregation, right? If there was a way that somebody's hanging on to their /16, and instead of selling it for $1 million, they all decide to break it into a bunch of 24s and sell it for $10 million. It seems like there could be, a policy could not necessarily stop that, but at least kind of slow that down and, provide smooth out that curve of all that kind of activity.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that the policymakers have been looking at in terms of, okay, if we allow this, what happens with de-aggregation? And so that definitely plays a part of their sort of the worry with me sort of things that they're looking at.
Right, but I said well-crafted, well-thought-out, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So we really encourage you to be a part of that if you can. So there's an ARIN PPML list, ARIN-PPML at ARIN.net, that where a lot of these discussions are actually going forward. Okay, I got 10 minutes left. Okay, next to talk about is V6 deployment, or the lack of thereof. One of the things that we're doing is we've done, as NANOG has, and the various regional registries has, and the ITF has, is we've had these like V6 hours. We're actually coming back to the Caribbean here again in a couple weeks to have a V6 workshop to actually meet with the local people in their local environments and actually say, okay, look, this isn't so hard to do. We'll go ahead and do this together. And this is how we set it up and how you can actually take this home and start playing with it yourselves. And helping to proselytize the word that way. And also we've been very active in all sorts of outreach activities, whether it being putting out booths. We have a booth out here, not so much to talk about how do you do V6, but we have booths in other locations where NANOGers essentially don't really go too much, but people within enterprises do, and trying to reach out to them in terms of, hey, look, when you buy equipment, make sure it's V6 enabled, and think about how you plan on rolling to V6 here in the future. The last thing that's a policy issue that the community is dealing with is the validity of data and who is. And I think that Aaron's brought that up in the past here with his past comments about, okay, who is this kind of broken, so what can we do to replace it? And there's a number of policy initiatives underway that are kind of looking at this thing as well. And I encourage you guys who are not active in the ARIN community to actually do, and you have an interest in this, now is the time to get involved. So, in talking about getting involved, our next meeting, as I mentioned, is in Barbados here in 2 weeks, and it's kind of coupled together with a CTU workshop along with a V6 workshop. We have a mini ARIN meeting where we go ahead and go through the policies that for the people who can make it down there. And this is solicited input from those who are within the Caribbean nations areas, Caribbean nation, in the Caribbean portion of the ARIN region, since many of them can't travel to the States as easily as the rest of us can, who are based in the States or in Canada. Our next large policy meeting is going to be in San Antonio, and that's going to be in April, towards the end of April. And we encourage you to be a part of those. It's essentially a time for everybody to discuss policies, ones that are actually brought to the table, to gauge some sort of interest in those policies and move forward. You also get to meet with many of your compatriots, some of which you may not have seen in Nanook. So it's kind of interesting. As a technical person who's gone to both meetings for many years, there's some crossover, but not as much as you would think. So there's definitely a lot of people that go to those meetings that don't go to these, and vice versa. So it's kind of interesting to see the crossover between the two. And then you can learn about how ARIN's policy process actually works, and how open it is, and how you can actually be a part of it, and how the ARIN Advisory Council, many of which are here today, have a role in helping craft those policies as well. Oops, wrong way. One of the things that we offer is remote participation via Jabber. Kind of chuckle a little bit on the word free here. Yeah, it is free. You don't have to pay for it. So you can actually remotely participate. There's actually a real-time transcript that actually logs on a web page, and there's a Jabber session for those people who want to make comments. Another one to ask questions for those who can go to the mic, and so on and so forth. So that you can have remote participation is actually fairly simple and actually pretty painless. And also have a webcast as well. God, I'm going the wrong way twice. Finally, for those who don't have a lot of funds, there's a fellowship program available for a person per sector within Canada, Caribbean, and U.S. Areas. And that deadline's approaching. We have one person who's met the qualification, and we're looking for a few more. So, Aaron, you have a question?
I had a comment, actually. I just want to stress the severity of this. There are, and this is not meant to be negative in any way, the people who are making policy right now, the majority of them are assignments and allocations people, and they're making policy that affects routing. They're making policy that affects systems. They're making policy that affects architecture and business process. And if we don't get involved in it, it's going to be entirely written by people who are primarily working on assignments and allocations, and that's a problem. We can clearly see things like, January 1, 2009, they started. ARIN starts issuing 4-byte ASNs by default. I think the numbers were something like 160 or so assigned, and maybe 2 or 3 were actually used, not returned.
That's correct.
It's crazy. We need to get involved as a community. It's time to remove the separation of operators and policy writers, so please show up in an ARIN meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron. Boy, you're a better plug than me. You want to come up here?
Mark, just real quick, I have a question following up on Aaron's question. It's true that there is insufficient overlap in North America of policy and operations. So my question is, so Aaron's saying, y'all should just go to ARIN. Here we are, here we're operators and engineers and architects, and we should just go to ARIN. Is there some other substantive way that the NANOG organizing committees and the NANOG community and the ARIN committee can facilitate that interaction? And that, which is not just, y'all should come to our meetings and we should go to your meetings, because that could happen, but the reality is there have been ARIN meetings for a very long time, and there have been NANOG meetings for a long time, and there is the overlap that there is, and ARIN is a compelling, beautiful man, but I don't believe that he's actually going to substantially change the number of people here who go to those meetings.
That's very correct. But so one of the things that we do have these we have these joint meetings once a year between the two, and maybe we need to think about sort of ways to opening the two together in a bigger way. Now there has been some ARIN's meeting agenda has been fairly fixed over the last couple of years. You have 2 days of public policy meetings, and the last day is a members meeting where you do things like vote on the people who go to the advisory council, people who are voted on the board, and so on and so forth. Maybe we need to think about how we can actually do a better job in inclusion of the two things and making these things a little bit so that we have better cross-pollination. Because, like as I observed, and many of you who have been there too, there are two distinct sets of people, and as ARIN said, they are different. Definitely, I didn't want to say it, but I'll say it now. The ARIN meetings are a little bit less technically focused than the NANOG meetings, but they have just as many technical, if not more, technical implications that come out of them. So anything else? Okay. I guess I'm done. Thank you very much.